1 by, 2 by, 3 by. Nope, not the start of a mathematical equation or the measurement of a piece of wood, but the way that many people will refer to the number of chain rings fitted to the cranks of their bike. So in this video, I'm going to explain the differences between the setups so that you can decide what might be best for you. The chain ring or chain rings, when combined with multiple sprockets fitted to the rear wheel of your bike, will give you a number of different gear ratio options. Now, before we dive into all of this, you need to understand the basics of gear ratios. So if you already do, then I'll put a little time code up on the screen so you can skip ahead, and I don't want to waste your time telling you stuff that you already know. We have gear ratios to allow us to maintain a suitable cadence, which is the rate at how fast we turn the pedals depending on the speed that we're riding at. You calculate your gear ratio by dividing the number of teeth on the driver gear, which is the chain ring on the front of your bike, by the number of teeth on the driven gear, which is the cassette sprockets on the rear wheel. Let me give you two simple examples. You have a 36 tooth chain ring and a 28 tooth cassette. So 36 divided by 28 equals 1.286, which is expressed as a ratio as 1 to 1.286. So for every one rotation of the crank, the rear wheel will rotate 1.286 times. A gear ratio like this is suitable for slow speeds, maybe cycling uphill. If we increase the size of the chain ring and reduce the size of the sprocket to, say, a 50 tooth and a 14 tooth, we have 50 divided by 14, which is 3.571. So expressed as a ratio, that's 1 to 3.571, meaning the rear wheel will rotate 3.571 times per one revolution of the crank. This is a gear ratio which is ideal for riding at higher speeds, but not cycling uphill. Now, if you know the circumference of your bike tyres and your cadence measured in RPM, you could then work out the speed that you could ride at any given gear ratio for that cadence. You get the idea. Right, lesson over. Now, seeing as us cyclists need to be able to ride over all sorts of different terrains at all sorts of different speeds and still maintain a comfortable rate of cadence, so the speed that we're pedaling at, somewhere between 80 to 100 RPM, we need to have multiple gear ratios. Now, on the rear of our bike, we have a number of different cassette sprockets, ranging anywhere from 7, 8, 9 speed, all the way up to 13 speed in some cases. And then when it comes to the crank and the chainring options, you've got 1 by, 2 by, and 3 by. So 1 chainring, 2 chainrings, and 3 chainrings. So let's take a look at those. Starting with the triple, so 3 chainrings on 1 crank, say along the lines of a 30, 39 tooth and a 50 tooth, although in the instance of this crank, which is off the infamous Eurobike, we have a 24, a 34 and a 42 tooth. Now, a crank like this is going to potentially offer you the widest range of gear ratios, perhaps ideal for beginners who plan on riding up some super steep climbs at a slower pace. Using 3 chainrings like this also gives you the option of, when you're using different sections of the cassette relevant to the size and the section of the chainring you're using, to limit the angle of the cross chain that you get, which in theory should help make your bike a little bit more efficient and reduce the wear on the components. Now, talking of the wear on the components, because we've got 3 chainrings, your general wear and tear is spread across 3 different sections, which means in theory this should last a little bit longer. Now, the downside, or some of the negatives with a 3 by or triple crank, is that it's also likely to be the heaviest option when you're comparing like for like components. And even though you have that really wide range of gear ratios, many of those ratios will be doubled up, meaning that you can achieve the same gear ratio just in multiple different ways, which seems kind of unnecessary. Also, some super modern frames might not have the capability to have a triple chainset installed. And in terms of the component choice and availability you have, a triple chainset is somewhat more limited in your choice compared to a 1 by or 2 by setup. Now, originally the triple chainset was considered great for non-racing cyclists. However, with the invention of wide ratio cassettes with perhaps 11, 12 or 13 speeds, the triple chainset is something that we don't really see all that often anymore, and its need has kind of diminished a bit. Hence, when we're looking for a triple chainset, many of them that we'll find will be fitted to bikes at a lower price point, or those designed for entry-level cyclists. 2x or the double crank next, which is by far the most common setup to see on road or on many gravel bikes. So that's 2 chainrings fitted to 1 crank. Now the advantages of the double chainring are that in most cases it's lighter than the triple. It offers a near comparable range in gear ratios. You should have compatibility with almost all bikes. I mean, okay, there might be the odd 1 or 2 bikes which are single chainring compatible only, but you get what I mean. A 2x crank offers for a cleaner, smarter looking bike, much like what the pros ride, which might not be important to you, but for some people it is. But for me, the big advantage of a 2x crank is that it feels like it offers a near perfect balance between the gear ratio range that you have and those jumps between the gears. Downside of a double chainring is that it's going to wear at a quicker rate than a triple because the wear is going across 2 rather than 3 chainrings. And although you can get close to the gear ratio range offered by the triple crank, using a double crank, you are going to struggle to get that same low ratio suitable for riding at super slow speeds. And then in addition to that, you do have a larger jump in gear ratio when switching from one chainring to the other when compared to a triple. Now, I know this is a gravel crank, but typically for our road bikes, and traditionally, we would have seen a 39-53 tooth chainset as what we're kind of seeing as the standard. It was what all the pros used and what many amateur riders thought, well, if it was good for the pros, it's good for me too. However, what we didn't take into consideration is that as non-pros, we just don't quite have the same strength, fitness, or ride at the same speeds as the pros. So gradually, we saw the invention of a compact crank, which used smaller chainrings and allowed for gear ratios much more suitable for the slower speeds that us amateurs ride at. And the best bit was, these compact cranks looks just the same as the traditional ones. And we have gear ratio ranges such as 34-50 tooth, or perhaps this gravel crank option, we've got a 48 and a 31 tooth. And then finally, we've got the most recent in tech and trends, a 1x crank. So that's just 1 chainring fitted to your crank. Now a 1x crank is by far the simplest and easiest option when it not only comes to maintenance, but also in terms of the use. And you've got a whopping great big range of chainring sizes to choose from, depending on the speeds that you ride at. The advantages of a 1x crank are that you've got no need for a front derailleur or a shifter, and no need to set those components up. It's often considered to be the lightest and most aero setup because we haven't got the need for that front derailleur. And by having less parts fitted to the bike, generally you can make your bike considerably lighter. You will, however, struggle to find a single crank setup on many road bikes, although there are the odd 1 or 2 out there, and you're more likely to find a 1x setup fitted to a gravel or cyclocross bike where they're pretty commonplace, and they'll be combined with a super wide range cassette, meaning that provided you've got the suitable size chainring in the first instance, you should have a range of gears suitable for almost all riding situations. Many 1x chainrings, such as this one, have a narrow and wide tooth profile to them. This is something specific to a 1x chainring, which helps to keep the chain held securely in place. You can't use this setup on a triple or a double chainring crank because the chain needs to mesh correctly, and as you shift onto other chainrings, it wouldn't do so. Now, some of the disadvantages of using a 1x crank are quite simply, because we've only got 1 chainring, all of the wear is going onto 1 component, and therefore it's going to wear at a much greater rate than a double chainring or perhaps the triple, meaning you're going to need to replace it slightly more often. When using a single chainring like this, you're also going to have a far more extreme chain line when you're using either your easiest or hardest gear, which is again going to increase the rate of wear ever so slightly, but also ever so slightly going to decrease the chain efficiency of your bike. Having said that a 1x crank offers the lightest setup possible, in order to get an equivalent gear ratio range that you could have in a dual crank or a triple crank, you're going to have a super wide range cassette. Now, by having that super wide range cassette, it's going to be heavier than a smaller range cassette, and therefore it's going to offset or counteract some of that weight saving from not having all the chainrings and that front derailleur. So those are within reason the different options available when it comes to chainrings fitted to your bike. Now, it's by no means an exhaustive look at all of this, and there are lots of different ways to assess each of the different setups, but I feel it's a good representative example to hopefully make you more informed to make better choices on which setup might be more suitable for your riding style. And if you paid attention at the start of this video when I explained about the gear ratios for your bike, you'll now know how to assess the gear ratios currently fitted to your bike to components which you might be looking to purchase in the future. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a big thumbs up, and why not let me know in the comment section down below your thoughts on which chainring setup you think is best. Oh, and if you're also wondering how these cranks are perfectly balanced up, it's a shadow stand available at shop.globalcyclingnetwork.com. That's where you can get yours. Right, I'm gonna go now. See you later.